Under the cover of night, a pack of ruthless bikers targeted an innocent golden retriever, hurling rocks and chasing it into the shadows. But little did they know, this wasn't just any dog. It was carrying a mission that could unravel secrets tied to one of the most powerful figures in the world. What happens next will leave you speechless. Stay tuned as we uncover the shocking truth behind this dog's perilous journey and the unbelievable twist no one saw coming. The night was still, the kind of quiet that carried a foreboding weight. The road stretched endlessly, its surface glistening under the pale moonlight, damp from a recent rain. Somewhere in the distance, the low rumble of motorcycle engines began to rise, an ominous growl growing louder with each passing second. Scout's golden fur, usually a shining beacon of warmth, was damp and matted, streaked with mud and grime. He darted through the underbrush lining the highway, his breath coming in rapid bursts. In his mouth, clamped tightly between his teeth, was a small USB drive attached to a thin black cord, its purpose unknown to anyone but him and his master. The engines drew closer, breaking the stillness of the night. Scout hesitated for a moment, his ears pricking up, swiveling towards the sound. He could smell them before he saw them. The acrid tang of gasoline and leather mixed with the sour scent of sweat. His muscles tensed, a primal instinct warning him of danger. The golden retriever sprang forward, his paws pounding against the wet earth, his mind singularly focused. He had to keep moving. He couldn't let them catch him. On the road above, the bikers were closing in, their headlights piercing through the darkness like predatory eyes. At the head of the pack was Grizz, the gang's leader, his face a mask of grim determination. His voice barked through the roar of the engines. "There's no way that mutt is outsmarting us. Keep your eyes peeled." Behind him, Viper, the loudest and most reckless of the group, let out a mocking laugh. "It's just a dog, Grizz. You'd think we were chasing a ghost with how long this is taking." Grizz's voice was cold and sharp. "That dog has something we need. And until we get it, you keep your mouth shut and your eyes open." Scout's heart raced as he ducked beneath a thick cluster of bushes, his movements swift and precise, despite the fatigue clawing at his muscles. He didn't have the luxury of rest. His thoughts flickered briefly to his master, his steady voice, the way he'd pat Scout's head and scratch behind his ears. "You're the only one I trust with this," his master had said just before placing the USB around his neck. The memory burned in Scout's mind, propelling him forward through the dense, rain-soaked forest. The bikers, relentless in their pursuit, split off into groups, their headlights slicing through the darkness. The rumble of their engines echoed, bouncing off the trees and blending with the distant howl of the wind. Scout moved silently, his body low to the ground. Every step was calculated, every sound scrutinized. The woods were his ally, offering shadows and paths unknown to the metal beasts that roared above him. But they were closing in. As Scout emerged from the cover of the trees, he found himself on the edge of a narrow, rocky ledge. Below him, the ground sloped steeply into a ravine, the faint glimmer of a stream winding its way through the darkness. He paused, his golden eyes scanning the terrain for an escape route. The faint hum of approaching engines left him no time to think. With one last glance at the unforgiving drop below, Scout leapt, his body sailing through the air, the USB dangling from his neck like a talisman. The bikers screeched to a halt, just as the dog disappeared over the edge. Viper leaned over his handlebars, peering into the ravine with a sneer. No way he made it out of that alive. Grizz stepped off his bike, his boots crunching against the gravel. His eyes, dark and calculating, scanned the ledge. He didn't believe in underestimating anything, not even a dog. "If he's dead, we'll find the body," he said, his voice low. "And if he's not, he won't stay ahead for long." Below, hidden among the thick underbrush of the ravine, Scout landed hard, his body tumbling as he hit the soft, wet ground. Pain shot through his side, but he didn't stop. Shaking off the impact, he forced himself back on his feet, his legs trembling but steady. His mission wasn't over. As he moved deeper into the ravine, the sound of the bikers faded, replaced by the quiet rustling of leaves and the gentle murmur of the stream. For a moment, Scout allowed himself a single breath of relief, his mind steadying. He wasn't out of danger yet, but he had bought himself a sliver of time. He would need it. Somewhere far away, his master was counting on him, and Scout never let his master down. Scout navigated the ravine with care, his steps slow and deliberate. The jagged rocks and uneven terrain challenged his balance, but he pressed on, his instincts sharp. His breath formed small clouds in the cool night air, mingling with the faint scent of water and moss. Every muscle in his body ached from the fall, but his resolve never wavered. He had a mission, and failure was not an option. Above him, the bikers prowled the ledge, their voices carrying faintly down the ravine. Grizz's tone was calm, but there was an edge of frustration. "Spread out and search the area. If he's alive, we'll flush him out. Viper, take the north side. Mace, with me." The crunch of gravel under their boots faded as they moved away, but Scout knew they weren't far. He had to stay one step ahead. The sound of rushing water grew louder as Scout moved deeper into the ravine. The stream glinted faintly in the moonlight, winding like a silver thread through the darkness. Scout paused to lap at the water, his tongue darting out quickly as he kept his ears perked for any signs of pursuit. His body trembled from exhaustion, but his mind was sharp. He couldn't linger here long. Scout's thoughts drifted to his master, the familiar warmth of his voice and the comforting rhythm of his hands stroking Scout's fur. "This isn't just for me," his master had said, kneeling to attach the USB to Scout's collar. "It's for all of us. You're the only one who can do this." That memory alone fueled Scout's determination. He owed his master everything. In the distance, a faint glimmer of light caught Scout's attention. It wasn't natural, too steady and focused. He crept toward it, weaving through the underbrush with practiced ease. As he approached, he saw the light was coming from a small cabin nestled against the rocky hillside. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney, and the faint hum of a generator reached his ears. It was a place of refuge, but also a potential risk. Scout's instincts warred within him. The sound of engines revving in the distance made the decision for him. The bikers were regrouping, and it was only a matter of time before they found his trail again. Scout slipped toward the cabin, his body low, his movements silent. He approached the door, pawing at it gently, his soft whines barely audible. Inside, an older woman stirred from her chair, her knitting falling to the floor. She moved slowly, her joints creaking with age, and peered through the curtain. When she saw the bedraggled golden retriever on her porch, she hesitated. Scout's eyes met hers, pleading and filled with exhaustion. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the wind rustling through the trees. Then, the door creaked open. "Well, aren't you a sight?" the woman murmured, her voice gentle. She knelt slowly, reaching out a cautious hand. Scout flinched but didn't back away. The woman's fingers brushed against his fur, and her face softened. "You're hurt, poor thing." She opened the door wider, gesturing for him to come in. Scout hesitated, glancing back toward the forest, before stepping inside. The cabin was small but warm, lit by the soft glow of a lantern. Scout stood in the doorway, his body tense, ready to bolt if the situation turned dangerous. The woman moved to grab a towel, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "Let's see what we can do for you," she said, her voice soothing. Scout allowed her to wipe away the mud and examine his injuries. She clicked her tongue softly. "You've been through the ringer, haven't you?" Scout let out a low, tired whine, and the woman smiled faintly. "Well, you're safe here, at least for now." Outside, the faint rumble of engines grew louder, the sound sending a chill through the cabin. The woman's brow furrowed, and she moved to the window, peering out cautiously. "Whoever's looking for you, they're not far," she said, her voice low. She turned back to Scout, her expression hardening with resolve. "But they won't find you here, not if I can help it." Scout's ears perked up, his body tensing again. The woman moved to a small storage chest in the corner, pulling out an old rifle. She checked the ammunition, her hands steady despite her age. "I don't know what you're caught up in, boy," she said, "but if they want you, they'll have to go through me." The engines roared closer, and the tension in the air thickened. Scout stood by the door, his golden fur bristling as the night outside seemed to close in. The woman moved to stand beside him, her grip firm on the rifle. "Whatever's on that collar of yours," she murmured. "It must be worth a whole lot of trouble." And then, the lights of the motorcycles appeared in the distance. The motorcycle's headlights cut through the trees like predators' eyes, weaving closer with every passing second. The low growl of engines became a full-throated roar as the bikers approached. Scout stood rigid near the door, his muscles coiled and ready to bolt. The woman, rifle in hand, didn't flinch. Her sharp eyes narrowed as she watched the glowing lights bob through the forest. "They're not just passing through," she muttered to herself. "They're hunting." Scout gave a low growl, his ears pressed flat against his head. The woman glanced down at him, her weathered hand briefly brushing over his back. "Easy now," she whispered. "We've got the advantage. They don't know what they're walking into." The bikers dismounted at the edge of the clearing, their boots crunching against the gravel. Grizz motioned for silence, his hand raised like a commander leading a battalion. The others obeyed, their faces masked by the shadows. Only the soft hiss of the wind and the hum of the bikes remained. Grizz took a step forward, his gravelly voice cutting through the quiet. "We know you're out here," he called, his tone cold and deliberate. "Give up the dog, and no one gets hurt. This is your only warning." Inside the cabin, the woman stiffened. "He's bluffing," she muttered under her breath. "If they wanted to play nice, they wouldn't have come like this." She moved toward the window, keeping her profile low, and peered out. The bikers were scanning the clearing, their weapons visible in the dim light. Grizz held a large hunting knife, its blade gleaming ominously. Scout moved closer to the door, his body taut with tension. His instincts screamed for him to flee, but he didn't move. Something about the woman's steady presence grounded him. She crouched by the door, pressing her hand to his head. "Stay low and stay quiet," she murmured. "I'll handle this." She opened the door just a crack, enough for her voice to carry. "You're trespassing on private property," she said, her tone even but firm. "Turn back the way you came, and I won't have to call the sheriff." Grizz's lips twisted into a smirk. "The sheriff, huh? That's cute," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We're not here for you, lady. Just give us the dog, and we'll be out of your hair." The woman didn't falter. "There's no dog here," she replied. "And even if there were, I wouldn't hand it over to a pack of thugs like you." Grizz's smirk disappeared, replaced by a dangerous glint in his eyes. "I don't think you understand," he said, taking a step closer. "That dog's got something we need. We're not leaving without it." The woman straightened, her rifle resting against her shoulder. "And I don't think you understand," she said coolly. "The next step you take will be your last." There was a tense silence as the two locked eyes, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Behind Grizz, Viper shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, man," he muttered. "It's just some old hag. We can take her." Grizz held up a hand, silencing him. "Shut it, Viper," he said without turning. "This isn't about taking anyone. It's about getting what we came for." He looked back at the cabin, his eyes narrowing. "You've got one more chance, lady. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The woman's finger tightened slightly on the trigger, her jaw set in determination. "You boys think you're invincible because you've got numbers," she said, her voice steady. "But you're not the first trouble to come knocking on my door, and you won't be the last." Scout felt her resolve like a tangible force in the room. He crouched low, his golden fur blending into the shadows of the cabin. His mind worked quickly, piecing together his surroundings. If he was going to escape, he needed to do it soon. Outside, Grizz motioned to the others. "Spread out," he ordered. "She's stalling. The mutt's in there somewhere." As the bikers moved toward the cabin, the woman took a deep breath. She turned her head slightly, addressing Scout without looking at him. "Whatever you're carrying, it's more important than me or this place," she said softly. "When I give the signal, you run, you hear me? Don't look back." Scout's ears twitched, but he stayed rooted in place. The woman gave him a quick glance, her expression resolute. "Go," she whispered. "Do what you're meant to do." Then she swung the door open and stepped into the night, the barrel of her rifle gleaming under the moonlight. The confrontation had begun, and Scout didn't wait to see what would happen next. With a silent burst of energy, he darted through the cabin's rear door and into the forest, the USB bouncing against his chest. The woman's voice echoed behind him as she faced the bikers. "You picked the wrong house tonight," she said, her words laced with defiance. And then, the first shot rang out. The gunshot cracked through the night like a thunderclap, reverberating in the stillness of the forest. Scout flinched, but didn't stop. His paws hit the soft earth in rapid succession, his body low as he darted between trees. Behind him, chaos erupted at the cabin. Shouts and curses filled the air as the bikers scattered. Grizz barked orders, his voice cutting through the commotion. "She's just one old woman. Take her down, but keep it clean. We don't need cops sniffing around." The bikers fanned out, some taking cover, others advancing cautiously toward the cabin. Scout's ears swiveled as he ran, picking up fragments of sound. The hiss of a motorcycle being pushed over, the thud of boots against the ground, and the woman's voice, sharp and defiant, ringing out above the fray. She fired again, the sharp crack sending a clear message. She wasn't going down without a fight. Scout slowed as he reached the edge of a small stream, his golden coat gleaming faintly under the moonlight. The water was icy as it splashed against his paws, but he pressed on, wading through until he reached the other side. He paused briefly, his chest heaving, his ears straining to pick up any signs of pursuit. The forest was darker here, the canopy of trees thick and impenetrable. Scout moved carefully, his instincts guiding him as he navigated the uneven terrain. His mind flickered with fragmented memories of his master's voice. "Find the safe house, Scout. Trust yourself. You'll know when you're close." Scout didn't fully understand what lay ahead, but he knew he was moving in the right direction. He had to be. Behind him, the sounds of the cabin skirmish faded into the distance, but the tension in the air remained. He knew it was only a matter of time before the bikers regrouped. Grizz wasn't the type to give up, especially not with someone as relentless as Viper at his side. Scout had seen the man's face, a twisted mask of cruelty and arrogance. That one wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. As Scout pressed forward, the forest began to change. The ground became rockier, the trees sparser. In the distance, he could make out the faint outline of a hill, its silhouette sharp against the night sky. Something about it felt familiar, as though it was pulling him forward. His pace quickened, his body aching but determined. The quiet didn't last long. A faint rustling behind him sent a chill through Scout's spine. He froze, his ears swiveling. The sound grew louder, closer. Someone, or something, was following him. Scout crouched low, his golden coat blending into the shadows of the underbrush. His breath came shallow and quiet as he waited, his eyes scanning the darkness. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement, the faint glint of a flashlight beam cutting through the trees. The bikers had split up, and at least one of them had picked up his trail. Scout's muscles tensed as he assessed his options. He couldn't outrun them for long, not in his condition, but he could outsmart them. Slowly, Scout began to move, keeping low to the ground. He crept through the underbrush, each step careful and deliberate. The biker, whoever it was, seemed to be searching blindly, the flashlight beam swinging erratically. Scout circled wide, staying out of the light's reach. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved closer to the hill. It wasn't much farther now. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "I know you're out here, you little mutt," Viper sneered, his tone dripping with malice. "You've been leading us on a wild goose chase, but it ends tonight." Scout didn't flinch. He pressed on, his movements as quiet as the rustling wind. He reached the base of the hill and began to climb, his paws scraping against loose rocks and dirt. The incline was steep, but Scout was relentless. The USB swung against his chest, a constant reminder of his purpose. Behind him, Viper's voice grew louder. "Think you're clever, huh? You're just a dumb dog. You don't stand a chance against me." Scout reached the crest of the hill and paused, his chest heaving. Below him, the forest stretched out like a sea of shadows, and in the distance, he could see the faint glow of city lights. The safe house had to be close. He just needed to keep moving. But as he turned to descend the other side of the hill, the flashlight beam caught him. Viper's voice rang out triumphantly. "There you are!" Scout's heart lurched as he bolted down the hill, the sound of heavy boots crashing through the underbrush behind him. He could hear Viper cursing. His breath labored as he gave chase. "You think you can get away from me?" Viper snarled. "You're dead wrong." Scout pushed himself harder, the wind whipping through his fur as he zigzagged through the trees. The lights of the safe house were closer now, glowing faintly through the darkness like a beacon. Scout's lungs burned, and his legs felt like lead. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop, not now. The safe house was a faint shimmer in the distance, its glow a promise of sanctuary. Scout's breaths came in sharp, ragged bursts as he pushed his aching body forward. Behind him, the pounding of Viper's boots on the rocky terrain grew louder, accompanied by the occasional curse or taunt. The biker was relentless, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly through the trees as he closed the gap. "Nowhere to hide now, boy," Viper's voice rang out, laced with venom. "You've had your fun, but it's over." Scout darted through a thicket of underbrush, the sharp twigs scratching at his sides. His mind raced as he tried to calculate his next move. The terrain was uneven, the incline steep and treacherous. He needed to slow Viper down, to gain enough of an advantage to reach the safe house before the biker caught up. His golden eyes scanned the darkness, searching for anything he could use. As he rounded a bend in the trail, Scout spotted a narrow path veering off sharply to the right. It was barely visible in the shadows, but it offered a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. Without hesitation, he veered onto the path, his paws kicking up dirt and loose rocks. The trail wound steeply downward, the edges flanked by jagged cliffs that loomed like silent sentinels. Behind him, Viper skidded to a halt at the fork, his flashlight swinging back and forth. He let out a low growl of frustration. "Think you're clever, huh? Fine. You want to play hide-and-seek? Let's play." Scout pushed on, his ears tuned to every sound. The trail narrowed, and the drop-off to his left grew steeper, the ground vanishing into darkness. His heart pounded as he navigated the precarious path, each step careful and deliberate. The USB drive bounced against his chest, a constant reminder of the stakes. The trail curved sharply, leading Scout to a small clearing surrounded by towering cliffs. In the center stood a gnarled old tree, its branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the night sky. Scout hesitated, his instincts warning him of a trap. The clearing offered no cover, no easy escape if Viper caught up. But then he saw it, a faint, narrow crevice in the cliffside, just large enough for him to squeeze through. It was hidden in the shadows, nearly imperceptible unless you knew where to look. Scout's ears twitched, and he darted toward the crevice, his body pressed low to the ground. He slipped inside just as Viper's flashlight beam illuminated the clearing. The biker stormed into the open space, his breath coming in angry bursts. His eyes scanned the area, his flashlight darting across the rocky walls and the ancient tree. "Where are you, you little mutt?" he growled, his voice echoing off the cliffs. "I'm not leaving without you." Inside the crevice, Scout crouched low, his golden coat blending with the shadows. He held his breath, his ears straining to pick up every sound. Viper's footsteps echoed loudly in the clearing, the man pacing back and forth, growing more agitated by the second. "I've got all night," Viper snarled, pulling a knife from his belt and flipping it casually in his hand. "You'll slip up. They always do." Scout remained still, his body trembling with adrenaline. He could hear the faint hum of the safehouse generator in the distance, tantalizingly close. He just needed Viper to move on, to give him enough time to make his final dash. But Viper wasn't moving. Instead, the man leaned against the gnarled tree, his knife scraping idly against the bark. His eyes scanned the cliffs, searching for any sign of movement. "You know," he said, his voice softening into a dangerous drawl, "I've dealt with smart ones before. Thought they could outfox me. You're no different." Scout's mind raced. Staying here too long would only increase the risk of being found. He needed a distraction, something to draw Viper's attention away from the crevice. Carefully he reached out with a paw, brushing against a small rock near the entrance. He nudged it, sending it skittering down the trail. Viper's head snapped up at the sound, his flashlight beam whipping around. "There you are," he snarled, lunging toward the noise. He raced down the trail, his heavy footsteps fading into the distance. Scout waited a few more seconds, his heart pounding in his chest. When he was certain the coast was clear, he slipped out of the crevice and bolted toward the safe house. His legs burned with exhaustion, his body pushed to its limits, but he didn't stop. The glow of the safe house grew brighter with every step, a beacon of hope cutting through the darkness. Finally, Scout broke through the tree line and into the open space surrounding the safe house. The building was small and unassuming, nestled against the hillside with a high, barbed wire fence encircling it. The faint hum of the generator buzzed in the cool night air, a low and steady rhythm that felt almost comforting. Scout sprinted toward the gate, his paws skidding to a stop as he reached it. A security camera mounted above the entrance swiveled toward him, its red light blinking. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a low beep sounded, and the gate swung open. Scout slipped inside, his body sagging with relief as the gate locked behind him. He was safe, for now. But he knew the night wasn't over. His mission was just beginning. The safehouse door creaked open slowly, revealing a dimly lit interior. Scout padded inside, his movements cautious but purposeful. The space was utilitarian, with metal walls and sparse furnishings. A single desk stood at the center of the room, cluttered with monitors, maps, and stacks of papers. A man sat at the desk, his back turned, engrossed in the screens that flickered before him. The man's silhouette was lean but sturdy, his posture tense. He spun around at the sound of Scout's paws on the floor, his sharp features illuminated by the cold glow of the monitors. His eyes widened slightly as he saw the golden retriever standing before him, its coat filthy and its chest heaving with exhaustion. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. He stood and crouched to Scout's level, his gaze scanning the dog's collar. "You actually made it." Scout stepped forward, lifting his head to reveal the USB drive secured tightly to his collar. The man carefully unlatched it, holding it in his calloused hands like it was a relic. His lips pressed into a thin line, and he muttered under his breath, "This better be worth it." As he plugged the USB into one of the monitors, Scout collapsed onto a worn rug by the desk, his body finally succumbing to the night's relentless chase. The man glanced down at him, his expression softening for a moment. "Tough night, huh?" he said, his tone gentler now. "Rest up, buddy. You've done your part." The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of encrypted files. The man's fingers flew across the keyboard, his eyes narrowing as he navigated through the labyrinth of data. "Come on," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the equipment. "Show me what's so damn important." Scout watched him through half-closed eyes, his breathing steadying as he lay on the rug. His instincts told him this man was an ally, but the tension in the room was palpable. The air seemed to crackle with anticipation as the man finally broke through the encryption. His eyes widened as the files opened, revealing documents, videos, and spreadsheets detailing something massive. "Holy!" The man's voice trailed off as he scanned the information. His face hardened, a mixture of shock and anger settling into his features. This is everything." Scout's ears perked up slightly, sensing the shift in the man's demeanor. The man leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "No wonder they were chasing you," he said, glancing down at Scout. "This isn't just political dirt. This is explosive." Before he could delve further, a faint noise outside caught his attention. The man stiffened, his eyes flicking to the monitors displaying the safehouse's external cameras. The screens showed the forest, bathed in eerie infrared light. One of the feeds flickered as movement registered, a single figure emerging from the tree line. "Damn it!" the man hissed, his fingers darting to a nearby console. He magnified the image, revealing Viper's face twisted in frustration and fury. The biker was moving cautiously, scanning his surroundings, a blade glinting faintly in his hand. Scout rose to his feet, his ears pricked and his body taut. The exhaustion melted away, replaced by a surge of alertness. The man grabbed a small radio from the desk and spoke into it. "We've got company, just one, but he's close." A crackling response came through the radio. "Acknowledged. Reinforcements are en route, ETA 5 minutes." The man nodded and glanced at Scout. "We just need to hold him off until backup arrives." He pulled a handgun from a drawer and checked the clip, his movements quick and efficient. "You stay here," he said firmly, though he knew the dog likely wouldn't listen. Scout followed the man to the door, his golden eyes glowing with determination. The man shook his head with a faint smirk. "Figures," he muttered. "Loyalty like yours is hard to argue with." Outside, Viper moved closer to the perimeter, his movements slow and deliberate. He crouched near the barbed wire fence, his fingers brushing over the lock mechanism. "Smart mutt," he muttered, his voice low, "but not smart enough." The man positioned himself by the door, his gun trained on the gate. Scout stood beside him, his muscles coiled. A quiet tension settled over the safe house, the only sound the faint hum of the generator. The man's finger hovered over the trigger, his breathing steady. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, Viper scaled the fence. The alarm blared, shattering the stillness of the night. Viper hit the ground running, his blade glinting as he charged toward the safe house. Scout growled low and deep, his body surging forward just as the man opened fire. Bullets sparked against the metal walls as Viper darted and weaved, his movements erratic but purposeful. He reached the door, slamming his shoulder into it as the man braced against it from the other side. Scout lunged, his teeth sinking into Viper's arm. The biker let out a furious yell, slashing wildly with his knife. Scout dodged, his jaws snapping as he forced Viper back. The man fired again, the shot grazing Viper's leg. The biker stumbled, his momentum faltering. In the distance, the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Viper's face twisted in anger and desperation as he realized his time was running out. He turned his gaze to Scout, his eyes narrowing. "You're not getting away with this," he snarled, blood dripping from his arm. Scout stood his ground, his golden fur bristling, his growl a warning. The reinforcements were close, and Viper knew it. He staggered back, his knife slipping from his hand as he turned and bolted toward the fence. The man lowered his gun, exhaling a sharp breath. He glanced down at Scout, his expression a mix of relief and respect. "Hell of a fight, boy," he said. "Hell of a fight." Scout stood silently, his chest heaving as he watched Viper disappear into the forest. The night wasn't over, but for now, they had won. The safe house fell silent except for the hum of the generator and the distant sound of the reinforcements drawing closer. Scout stood near the doorway, his gaze fixed on the tree line where Viper had vanished. His golden fur, now streaked with dirt and blood, bristled slightly, his senses still on high alert. The man beside him knelt, placing a firm hand on Scout's back. "Easy, boy," he said quietly, his voice steady. "He's gone, for now." Scout's ears twitched, but he didn't move. The tension in his body slowly eased as the faint crunch of gravel signaled the arrival of backup. A black SUV pulled up, its headlights cutting through the night. 3 figures stepped out, their movements efficient and purposeful. The man rose to meet them, his hand resting briefly on Scout's head in a silent gesture of reassurance. The leader of the group, a tall woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, strode forward. She wore a tactical vest and carried a sidearm holstered at her hip. Her sharp eyes swept over the scene before landing on the man. "Report," she said briskly. "Just one attacker," the man replied, gesturing toward the fence. Persistent, managed to breach the perimeter but retreated after resistance, likely regrouping with others. Her gaze shifted to Scout, her brow furrowing slightly. "This the package?" The man nodded. "That's him." And he delivered. He gestured toward the USB, still plugged into the monitor inside. "The files are decrypted. It's big, bigger than we thought. Names, locations, dates. Enough to blow the whole operation wide open." The woman's lips tightened, her expression unreadable. She glanced back at her team and gave a curt nod. "Secure the perimeter," she ordered. "We don't want any surprises." The agents dispersed, their movements swift and practiced. The woman turned back to the man. "How's the dog holding up?" "Better than most of us would after a night like this," he said with a faint smile. "He's tougher than he looks." Scout sat beside the man, his golden eyes watching the interaction. He understood the gravity of the situation, even if he couldn't grasp the specifics. The tension in the air was palpable, and every instinct told him the fight wasn't over. Inside the safe house, the woman moved to the desk, her sharp eyes scanning the files on the monitor. Her face hardened as she scrolled through the documents, her jaw tightening with each passing second. "This is catastrophic," she muttered. "If this gets out, it's not just one man's downfall, it's an entire network collapsing. The ripple effect could destabilize everything." "That's the idea," the man said, his tone flat. "Expose the corruption, let the chips fall where they may." The woman glanced at him, her expression cautious. "You understand what this means, right? There are people, powerful people, who will stop at nothing to make sure this doesn't see the light of day." The man's eyes flicked to Scout, then back to the woman. "That's why he's here. He's already done more than any of us could have asked, but we're not done yet." Scout tilted his head, sensing the shift in their focus. The man knelt beside him again, his voice low. "We've got one more leg of the journey, buddy. You up for it?" Scout gave a low bark, his tail wagging once despite his exhaustion. The man smiled faintly, his hand ruffling Scout's ears. "That's what I thought." The woman straightened, her expression resolute. "We'll need to move soon," she said. "The longer we stay here, the greater the risk. The files need to be transferred securely, and we need to get him out of here before they regroup." The man nodded, already gathering supplies from a nearby cabinet. "We'll need a distraction to cover our tracks, something to draw them away from the main route." The woman's lips curled into a grim smile. "Leave that to us. We've got a few tricks up our sleeves." Scout watched as the team moved with purpose, their voices blending into a steady hum of planning and preparation. His body was tired, but his mind remained sharp. He understood that the journey wasn't over, that his mission was far from complete. The safe house had been a temporary refuge, but the real challenge lay ahead. As the team finalized their plans, the man turned to Scout once more. "You've come this far," he said quietly. "One more push, and we'll finish this. Together." Scout's golden eyes locked with the man's, a silent understanding passing between them. The night still loomed dark and uncertain, but within its shadows, Scout carried a light, a spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. The man rose, his voice firm as he addressed the team. "Let's move. We've got a long road ahead, and no room for mistakes." Scout stood, his body weary but ready. The safe house door opened, and the night air rushed in, carrying with it the promise of danger and the weight of responsibility. Without hesitation, Scout stepped forward, his heart steady, his purpose clear. The convoy moved swiftly through the forest, their vehicles gliding over the uneven terrain with practiced precision. Scout sat in the back seat of the lead SUV, his golden eyes fixed on the window as the trees blurred past. The air inside was tense, the hum of the engine underscoring the weight of their mission. The man sat beside him, his rifle resting across his lap, his expression unreadable but alert. "We're about 20 minutes out from the drop point," the driver announced, his voice cutting through the quiet. "If they're regrouping, they'll try to intercept us before then." The woman in the passenger seat turned slightly, her sharp gaze flicking to Scout. "They'll expect us to take the main route," she said. "We've got a detour lined up, rugged terrain, but it'll keep us out of sight." The man nodded. "Good. Let's keep them guessing." Scout's ears twitched as he listened to their conversation, his instincts sharpening. He could sense the unease that hung in the air, the way every glance out the window carried an undercurrent of tension. He shifted slightly, his body coiled and ready, as though he could feel the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. The convoy reached a fork in the road, the lead SUV veering sharply onto a narrow, overgrown path. Branches scraped against the vehicle's sides, the sound grating but distant compared to the quiet murmurs of strategy among the passengers. Scout kept his gaze forward, his body steady even as the terrain grew rougher. Then, like a predator pouncing from the shadows, The attack came. A deafening explosion rocked the rear vehicle, a fiery burst of light illuminating the forest. Scout barked sharply, his body tensing as the SUV skidded to a halt. Shouts erupted from the radios as the convoy scrambled to react. "Ambush!" the woman shouted, already reaching for her weapon. "They've blocked the path. Rear vehicles hit." The man cursed under his breath, his hand instinctively moving to steady Scout. "Stay low," he muttered, though the command was more instinct than expectation. Scout was already crouched, his eyes sharp, his muscles taut. The driver reversed hard, maneuvering the lead SUV into cover as bullets rained down from the treetops. The bikers had regrouped, their figures barely visible in the shadows, their weapons trained on the convoy. Grizz's voice cut through the chaos, his tone commanding. "Take them out. Get that dog. Alive if you can." Scout growled low in his throat, his instincts kicking in. He glanced at the man, who gave him a brief nod before stepping out of the vehicle, rifle raised. The woman followed, moving with practiced precision as she returned fire. "We can't stay pinned here," she shouted. "We need to push through." Scout leapt out of the vehicle, his paws landing lightly on the forest floor. He darted to the man's side, his golden coat blending with the dappled shadows. The man glanced down, his expression grim but trusting. "You're with me," he said, his voice low. "Let's finish this." The team moved together, their coordination seamless despite the chaos. Scout stayed close to the man, weaving through the trees as the gunfire intensified. The USB drive still dangled from his collar, its presence a constant reminder of the stakes. Then, through the cacophony of battle, Scout's keen ears picked up a sound, a faint but deliberate movement to his left. He turned sharply, his body instinctively angling toward the noise. Grizz emerged from the shadows, his knife gleaming in the faint light. "Smart dog," Grizz sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "But this is where it ends." Scout didn't hesitate. With a surge of energy, he launched himself at Grizz, his teeth bared. The two collided, Grizz's knife slashing wildly as Scout's jaws clamped onto his arm. The biker let out a furious yell, struggling to shake the dog off. The man turned at the commotion, his rifle snapping to attention. "Scout!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He took aim, but Grizz used Scout as a shield, pulling the dog close to block the shot. "You want the mutt?" Grizz snarled, blood dripping from his arm. "Come and get him!" Scout's growl deepened, his body twisting as he broke free from Grizz's grip. The man fired, the shot grazing Grizz's shoulder and forcing him to stumble back. Scout pressed the advantage, lunging again with precise, calculated ferocity. The woman's voice crackled through the radio. "Reinforcements are 5 minutes out. Hold your ground." Grizz, bleeding and cornered, threw a desperate glance toward the tree line where his men were faltering under the team's counterattack. "This isn't over," he spat, retreating into the shadows. "Not by a long shot." The forest fell eerily silent as the last of the bikers scattered, their retreat marked by the faint rumble of motorcycles fading into the distance. Scout stood tall, his chest heaving, his golden fur streaked with dirt and blood. The man approached him, kneeling to check for injuries. "Good boy," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of genuine gratitude. "You did it." Scout licked the man's hand, his tail wagging faintly despite his exhaustion. The woman reappeared, her expression stern but relieved. "They'll regroup again, but not tonight," she said. "We've bought ourselves some time." The convoy reassembled quickly, the damaged vehicle abandoned as they prepared to move. The man lifted Scout into the SUV, his hands steady. "We're almost there," he said, his tone reassuring. "Just a little further and it's over." Scout curled up in the back seat, his eyes heavy but watchful. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for now, they had survived. And as the convoy rolled forward, Scout knew he wouldn't stop, not until his mission was complete. In the end, the story of Scout, the golden retriever, is a reminder of the power of loyalty, courage, and the bonds that transcend words. Scout's journey wasn't just about delivering a USB or evading danger. It was about embodying a commitment so pure that it pushed him beyond exhaustion, fear, and pain. His determination, even in the face of overwhelming odds, teaches us that true strength often comes in the most unassuming forms. The bikers, blinded by their mission and assumptions, underestimated the resolve of a dog driven by love and purpose. They remind us that our actions, no matter how justified we think they are, have ripple effects, and we must be careful not to let anger or greed cloud our judgment. Scout's survival and ultimate success weren't just a victory for his master, but a symbol of hope for all who face adversity. In a world often driven by conflict and chaos, Scout's journey proves that even the smallest among us can make a monumental impact. We all have missions in life, goals, loved ones, and values we fight for. Let Scout's story inspire you to face your challenges head-on, with unwavering resolve and an open heart.